What's up, everyone? Welcome to our Week 8 recap. I'm going to be talking about the playoff games and the final regular season game for the C and D schools. It was obviously a huge week when we talk about playoff football, win or go home. And we had some great performances. We had some teams get some revenge from earlier season losses. And we've had some tough losses that teams are going to have to swallow and I think do some, reevaluations going into next year. So let's kind of dive right into it. First off, just want to thank our Patreon community once again for your guys' support. This is obviously exclusive content, but you guys helping to donate to our group really is what helps us grow. So really do appreciate you guys. I want to give a shout out to you guys there. And also we have two teams of the week, which I'm going to be repping for our next show as well. And you can see my hat here, Suffering with their huge victory on the road against Mamaroneck in their game, and Peekskill, which I can't wear two hats at once, but we got Peekskill also with their huge victory in the playoffs versus Spring Valley. So let's go into all the games. And first one, we're going to start double A and go all the way down to the Hudson Valley Football League and then do C and D, their final regular season game as they go into the playoffs. And starting with double A, we have Ossining at Arlington, and Arlington winning 52-14. Arlington goes 9-0. Ossining drops to 4-5. And let's start with Ossining, the road team. And the big thing when Ossining going into this game, they really wanted to run the football and play as good enough defense as they can, try to limit big plays. And unfortunately, they were able to run the ball, but offensively they had 4 turnovers, right? So 2 fumbles lost, 2 interceptions. I mean, Anthony LaFaro, he's been a bell cow, huge player for them all season long. 37 carries, 172 yards, and a touchdown. So he ran the ball well. That's about 5 yards a carry. About 5 yards a carry. So, they ran well. The offensive line did a pretty solid job, but the turnovers were absolutely killer. And their quarterback, Shalyn John, 6 of 9 for 65 yards and a touchdown, right? So, again, less than 10 passes. They still got a high clip completion percentage-wise, but the turnovers. He had an interception. Jean Pierre was leading the way with 3 receptions for 53 yards, but he also had an INT thrown on a trick play. Offensively, 244 yards of total offense. Where, again, not great, but, they moved the ball relatively well. It's the turnovers that really killed them. Defensively is where things really got unfortunate. They gave up 519 yards, right? They did force a fumble, but too many yards against this high-powered Arlington offense. So trying to pull off the upset on the road, can't give up that many big plays, right? So, and losing the turnover battle. But I do think Ossining overall, again, winning those games, I thought they were going to be a unique team coming into this because they had some talent. Just wasn't sure can they put it all together. Making the playoffs, getting that huge upset victory over North Rockland, but playing against a very tough Arlington team. And now let's move to Arlington. Offensively, again, scored 35 points in the first half. This is an offense that really has been humming. Now they're 1 victory away from going to the section title game, which, again, that's got to be the big goal there. Over 500 yards of total offense, like I mentioned a little bit previously. Throwing the ball, running the ball, really efficient on kind of both aspects. Now, they also had 10 penalties, right, which, again, in this kind of game you can win, but those kind of penalties building up, and at times Arlington's had a lot of penalties at times, which have really hurt them. But let's talk about their quarterback, Resigno. He was absolutely tremendous in this game. 10 for 10 passing, 203 yards, 2 touchdowns. That's like, again, maxing out on the quarterback rating scale. Unbelievable performance. Also ran for 198 yards and another 2 touchdowns. So he was sensational in this game. Really dominant performance. Offensive line also did a pretty solid job against some of the explosiveness from the Ossining D-line. DeGusto also had 2 rushing touchdowns. The receiving touchdown, Joshua had a receiving touchdown. Some of these young junior wide receivers, Arlington has a plethora of athletes, but some of these junior wide receivers can be huge X factors. Joshua had a receiving touchdown. Tuttle's another one who had a receiving touchdown, but Jordan, kind of that slot receiver, helped leading the way. He had 99 yards receiving. Now defensively, again, 244 yards total. It wasn't a dominant defensive performance, but they forced turnovers, right? Those 4 forced turnovers by this defense was a huge factor. Finn was very active in this game with 10 tackles. Luke Lavello, he has really had a strong stretch down the second half of this year. Also had an INT and 8 tackles. So Arlington, again, goes to the semifinals in a big way. The next one, obviously one of the teams of the week right here, suffered at Mamaroneck and probably one of the best games of the weekend. Suffern winning 35-33. Suffern goes to 5-3. Mamaroneck drops to 5-3. But boy, let's start with Suffern and winning on the road against the Mamaroneck team that was getting hot is a big challenge, and they did it. And offensively, to me, is the big question going into the game because the offense was struggling for the last few weeks, for the majority of the last few weeks. But this offense woke up and exploded. And a lot of kudos got to go to this offensive line, moving bodies, and this rush attack. They rushed for over 300 yards. Jeff Joseph leading the way with pretty much all the rushing yards at 322 and 5 touchdowns. I mean, those are Madden numbers. He was absolutely sensational. This offensive line did a great job of moving this Mamaroneck defensive front seven. The quarterback, Palumbo, not asked to throw a lot, but 5 of 6, 63 yards. Not turning the ball over. Like, those are some huge things. And you had Schnell and Lou make a couple nice plays in the passing game. But this offensive line and rush attack really dominated. Now, defensively, had a really strong first half. They were up 21-3. Now, things started to leak. They were giving up some big pass plays in the second half, but came down to the wire. Defense got a stop. And offensively, they were able to close the deal. So this is going to be a really fun game to watch. They obviously have to play some better defense in the second half, but this is a strong performance by Suffern. And when I go to Mamaroneck, I'll talk about the game and then season overall. They got off to a slow start. I mentioned they were down 21-3 right out of the gate in the first half. Quarterback Mackey, I thought, made a lot of plays, especially in the second half, throwing it to guys like Davidson, who really had a strong stretch down the year, made some huge plays. And you know, in that second half, being down 21-3, they end up outscoring them after that moment 30-14, right? So Mamaroneck really came rumbling back, started to play some better defense as well, but way too many rush yards allowed. Again, I mentioned over 300 rush yards allowed, a bit surprising by the defensive front seven, but Suffern's offensive line really came to play and moving people because, you know, they allowed less than 100 yards in the air. So, again, Mamaroneck, they came back in the game. They went for an onside kick, didn't get it, needed a stop, couldn't get that, and that's how the game closes, right? So, listen, Mamaroneck graduated a boatload of athletes from their section title appearance last year, and for them to get that home playoff game the way they played down the stretch, it was an impressive performance by the coaching staff and by this team. Let's go to the next game. Again, a very good game here was John J. East Fishkill at Scarsdale, with John J. East Fishkill winning 17-14. Going to the next round. This was, again, both defenses I thought played pretty darn well in this one. Close game all the way to the end. Let me start with John Jay. John Jay has a very powerful offense, but they were up against a Scarsdale defense that is not big, and we heard about that in the story. They're talking about they don't have a guy over 200 pounds on defense in their defensive front, but this is a scrappy unit that can really run, right? So, you know, I thought they were up against the team if they went into the spread, and they kind of changed the way they were going to approach the game. They wanted to run the ball downhill, right? They didn't want to spread it out and allow Scarsdale to use their athleticism and speed. So they were really trying to run the ball, shorten the game, tighten the game. Quarterback Feliciano, he had 2 rushing touchdowns. He had over 100 yards rushing at 137. Only threw the ball 7 times, right? He was 3 of 7 passing. Rossi also had another 35 yards, but it was on this offensive line with a size advantage against the defensive front of Scarsdale that really dictated this game. Now, defensively, I thought they played again. They were down, but they made enough plays, especially at the end when Scarsdale has the ball trying to drive when they were up 17-14, and they made the plays at the end to win. Feliciano coming off the edge and kind of creating an offset throw, but Crouch, Vanderstuff, James Burt, all made some huge plays for this defense. And John J. Fishkill wins with that, running the football and playing good defense. And that's how they win against a very scrappy Scarsdale team. Now when I go to Scarsdale, they were up 14-10 midway through the fourth quarter. So they were playing a good style of football, which again was running the ball, which they had some success on. And playing good defense. They were limiting a John J. East Fishkill very powerful offense to not a lot of big plays. Even when they were giving up rush yards, they were still keeping them out of the end zone, right? So that was kind of a big thing there for Scarsdale. But at the end of the day, they couldn't drive at the end. I mean, Camden Madels had a rushing touchdown. This Scarsdale team is a scrappy group. They talked about it, you know, in the article how they're not very big, and I think it was kind of an emphasis that, hey guys, we need to hit the gym going down in the future. But I got to tell you that I thought the Scarsdale team also had a lot of kids who graduated, especially at the quarterback spot, and they had a strong year. But again, going up against in these playoffs, there is such a small margin of error, and Scarsdale unfortunately couldn't finish the drive. Another big thing too for this defense that I wanted to mention, John J.'s Fish go 3 for 3 on fourth down. Right, there were some key moments here that Scarsdale needed to make a stop, and John Jay continued drives. The final AA game I want to talk about is New Rochelle at Carmel, and Carmel winning 20-6. And I got to say, this was a very close game for a half. It was a game the entire game, but this was a tied game going into half, 6-6. Let me start with New Rochelle, and let's talk about them in this game first, and then kind of the overall look at the season. And they played tough, and offensively, they had 204 yards of total offense. It was not a lot, but they're playing against a Carmel defense that is very tough to run the ball. But I like the game plan, which was, again, attacking the outside, using their speed, and throwing the football. And they had some success. But finishing drives is what really killed New Rochelle. They had a drive at the end of the half where they had to kick a field goal. They got to the 1 yard line, then they had a penalty, then the time management issue, and it just didn't. They ended up running out of time and having to kick a field goal and not making enough plays to get there. And then with about 5 minutes left in the fourth, they drive all the way down the field again, getting into the 5 yard line, and they get stopped. Right, so, and there was just, organization issues, getting the play in quick enough, getting to the line of scrimmage, not having a false start, and those are killer in playoff games. And when you're trying to pull up the upset on the road, you have to be able to execute in the red zone, and New Rochelle could not do that. Now, again, even though it was 20-6, if they score there, it's potentially 20-13, but that changes the dynamic game, and with about 4.5 minutes left, you could get that ball back, right? So when they don't get it there, that's when this thing pretty much was over. And offensively also, they had a couple turnovers, right? So that was a big thing. They lose the turnover battle. When you're on the road trying to pull the upset, you got to execute in the red zone. You can't lose a turnover battle for an offense. Defensively, I thought the defense, again, they allowed less than 200 total yards. I thought the defense played pretty well. And, we knew Carmel was going to try to run the ball, try to muscle them, and New Rochelle held up pretty well. So a lot of kudos to this defense. They outgained Carmel, but they did give up some big pass plays in key moments. Now, they were forced to run the ball again. I say big pass plays, but in key moments, right? And that's what Carmel was able to finish drives in the second half, and New Rochelle was not. And that's really the huge difference in this one. We had Davis with rush for 81 yards for New Rochelle. James, 7-15 passing, not high percentage, had 82 yards. Dawson also made some nice plays, but just not enough. And when you look at the overall season, New Rochelle trying to get back to being a dominant force in AA, which hasn't happened the last couple years. Execution on the field is one thing, right? The details, where that's such an important thing for New Rochelle. And they have some, to me, I think there's a lot of good guys over New Rochelle, but they have to try to recreate that bubble. I talked about a few weeks back on the recap of these kind of Catholic schools trying to grab players, and especially up front. That's where they have to get really back to being that New Rochelle football, is having those athletes in the trenches. When I look at Carmel, now they're 1 win away from going to 3 straight section titles. They have 1 back-to-back, trying to go for a third time. And it was a slow start for them, no question, going 6-6.5. Offensively, they rushed for 110 yards, which you've seen Carmel the last few weeks almost rush for 300 yards a clip each game, or 200 plus at least. And we have Tristan Cash-Warloo, who leading the way with 90 yards, but not really much outside of that. New Rochelle did a really good job of maintaining their strength up front. Quarterback Nunez made some big plays, 9-14, pretty efficient, 87 yards, 2 touchdowns, and it was guys like Abel had a receiving touchdown leading the way, and Santiago, who was key in this one with a receiving touchdown and a big INT for Carmel. Now defensively, they 204 yards is not a lot of offense, but extremely stingent in the red zone, and that was a key thing for him. Forrester really leading the way. We had 7 or 8 tackles. We know Risley being super active. Musa Messi had a fumble recovery as well. This defense made the big plays in key moments, and they didn't give up big enough chunk plays. Now, they did a little bit at times that Nurseall got into the red zone on some 20-yard play, but once they got into the red zone, that's really when they didn't allow Nurseall to close the deal. So really big performance by the Carmel defense once again, only limiting to 6 points. All right, let's go to A now. And the first one let's talk about Mahopac at Harrison. And Harrison winning 18-0. And that pushes Harrison to 7-2. Mahopac drops to 5-4. And this was revenge for a week 1 loss for Harrison. And they dominated this game. But let's start with Mahopac. And again, talk about the game overall and then kind of the overlook. Offensively, when you look at this unit as a whole, and it kind of showed in this Harrison game, they struggled down the stretch. They didn't score an offensive touchdown 3 out of the last 5 games. And Koch is so vital to this offense that he makes some great plays. Sometimes it masks some of the issues that they have on the offensive side. And when Koch couldn't really get going, Harrison really bailed to slow him down. And when Carney's a solo receiver, they were bracketing him, right? Playing cover 2 or having safety over the top with man coverage by the corner. Forcing other guys to make big plays for them and being on a consistent level, and even scheme-wise, trying to force you to do different things. And that just didn't happen, and it didn't execute on the offensive side for Mahopac. And that was pretty darn apparent. Now, they really couldn't move much at all in the first half, and in the second half, they did get a little things going, but they couldn't finish drives either, right? They ran a quarterback blast, I think, a quarterback sweep on 4th down on one that got stuffed. Then when they got, a big chunk play on a quarterback run near the goal line, then they throw an INT to the defensive lineman, right? So Harrison pretty much dominated. And defensively, I thought they played relatively well. Now, they were down 12-0 at half, but what has helped Mahopac a lot this year, which they weren't getting, again, which is kind of showcasing some of the struggles they had offensively, they forced turnovers in every game this season defensively. Not this game. They didn't force any turnovers, right? Special teams. They had multiple special teams touchdowns, multiple opportunities of pinning teams deep in their in their own red zone on punts, big plays on kickoff, big plays on kick return. But that didn't happen either, right? So when you don't get that extra stuff, now there's more pressure on your offense. And so defensively, I thought they played relatively well, limiting big plays, but they didn't force any turnovers, and that was something they haven't done all season long. And, just seeing the overall picture on some of the quotes, they talked about it that they were not ready to play when it comes to Mahopac. They were not ready to play. They had a strong week of practice. They were talking some of that stuff. Interesting way to kind of describe coming out of the game. That's not a great quote. But overall, Mahopac, I do think they need to do some soul searching. I do think they need to have some step back and honest evaluation. Made the playoffs 3 out of the last 7 years, 1 playoff victory over the last 7 years. And, Mahopac does, because of a history of having a lot of hype behind it, there's a lot of perception around Mahopac that doesn't meet that perception, if I got to be honest. And I graduated at Mahopac. I went to a section title as a player. Coached at Mahopac a few years. It's just not living up to the hype, right? So if we're being very blunt. And I do think some evaluation. But let's go into Harrison. Dominant performance. And now there's 2 straight years Harrison has to meet Mahopac at home, and this was a dominant performance, their most dominant performance against the Mahopac program. And the defense was sensational. But let's start with the offense. And I do think they could some good things and some bad things here. But offensively, this offensive line tight end group was physical. And that was a huge key factor in this one. They were physical. They didn't bail away from the run, which I thought at times they did in week 1. Citro had a rushing touchdown. Lanza made some big plays when they moved him at quarterback at times, running some zone stuff, running some option stuff. He made some big plays when he had a rushing touchdown, but it was really led with Barcella, their fullback, who ran with a lot of physicality at 83 yards and a touchdown. I mean, they ran for 193 yards total And although there wasn't some big plays passing the ball, Krupe was another one who made some plays. There wasn't some huge plays. They did make some throws in some key moments to guys like McLaughlin and stuff like that. So, the offense wasn't explosive, but they were physical. They controlled the game. They controlled the time of possession. And they were able to finish some drives on special teams. Again, they had the opening kickoff they took all the way to the 20. They punched that in. That was so important for the momentum of this game. And defensively, I really love, again, I'm a big defensive guy, so watching a strong game plan and an execution by kids is something that really excites me. And that's what I really liked on this. You could see the game plan working into effect. They wanted to take out Koch, don't let Koch beat us, and we're going to bracket Carney when he is the solo receiver. And they executed. They swarmed to the ball. They tackled very well. And it really starts with his defensive line, Belidamage, Nicolaj Santarelli, and Belidamage, that big defensive tackle, had an INT. He also could have had 2 INTs at one point in this game, and this linebacking core really won this battle up front. And the secondary, who gave up 4 touchdowns in their week 1 meeting, nothing in this one, right? They were really good. They executed, didn't blow coverages. And this defense kind of just reminded that, hey, we're the better football team. That week 1 was, a little fraudulent. And I thought Harrison played great defense all year long. And this was a great revenge moment for them. So congrats to them. Let's talk about another big game here. And that's Clarkstown South at Yorktown. One of the more intriguing ones that I thought going into the weekend. And Yorktown winning 41-14. They also dominate in this football game. And we'll start with Clarkstown South. And this hasn't been the strongest Clarkstown South. We've seen them win a lot of games over the last couple of years. Graduated a lot of kids last year. And, this hasn't been their strongest year if you look at it in the overall picture, dropping to 3-5. And offensively, what has been a killer for them is, this is an offense that has been very explosive at times, but has really struggled to finish drives and turnovers. And also, only 1 INT. So it wasn't the huge turnover things, but they did struggle to get drives going, and they only scored 7 points at half. And against this Yorktown powerful offense, they definitely needed to put up more. Now, defensively, they allowed way too many big plays in the passing game. It was 27-7 at halftime, right? So it just felt like, man, the offense couldn't really get going. Defense was giving up some huge plays. It was a recipe for disaster. And it's not easy to run on Clarkstown South, which Yorktown did a decent job of. It wasn't a stellar performance, and so they went to the passing game, and it was successful against this defense. So Clarkstown South's going to try to rebound in the consolation game next week, try to get that 4th win. So interested to see how they come out and play against Mayapack. But that's another revenge game potentially for them, a rematch of a game that Mayapack won. But when I go to Yorktown, and this was another, you wanted to see how they were going to respond to a loss to Somers, right? And they responded very well. And you could see in their game plan, they were looking to go attack through the air. And Clarkstown South has not been, they've been pretty strong defending the run. So definitely the game plan was to throw. Still run the ball. I think it's important to have the balance, but their push was to throw the ball, and they did a good job of it. And it starts with Gonzalez. 14 of 25, 25 pass attempts, 253 yards passing, and 4 touchdowns. And his offensive line did a pretty good job of keeping him upright. And Gonzalez made some big-time throws in this one. And now they still ran the ball with Del Vecchio at 74 yards rushing. Constantine's another one who had 42 yards rushing, both of them scoring touchdowns. But it wasn't a huge rushing game compared to what the big plays in the passing game. And Costello helping the way, 150 yards receiving on 7 receptions and a touchdown. Weissman also made some big plays in the passing game. So this offense was very explosive. They were up big in the first half. Defensively, though, they limited a Clarkstown South offense to 14 points, right? 7 points at half. So this defense came out gunning. They did a really good job of limiting big plays from Clarkstown South. Connor Duncan, he had a receiving touchdown, but also 8 tackles and a sack. He helped lead the way defensively. We have Kane, who had another spectacular defensive lineman INT. Had one earlier in the year. He had one on a screen they were trying to set up, getting his big frame up and getting a pick. Also had a sack. Vogel's been sensational all year. I think he's the leading man for Defensive Player of the Year. Another sack for him. So you're seeing, again, 3 sacks. They forced a turnover. Chad Bowen and Ford are also guys who are very active defensively. Very impressive victory for Yorktown, both on the offensive and defensive side. The next game, let's talk about Pelham at Somers, and Somers winning 38-0 in this one. We'll start with Pelham. And it's been a tough year. Again, 1-7. You get into the playoffs, but this is the one thing I'm going to give Pelham a lot of credit. Their football program. Again, when you go into tiebreakers, they talk about your league record, then who you beat, and then it is points allowed in the first half. And because Pelham, especially down the half, were really competing, that's why they won the tiebreaker, right? So I always tell kids this all the time: just compete to the end, because you never know when those key moments. And this is one of them, right? They played good enough defense down the stretch to get themselves into a playoffs, and now they could say they made the playoffs. And it's because of just their want and desire, right? So that's kind of a huge thing that Pelham did to get into them. But talking about this game specifically, when you're on the road and trying to pull off the upset, there's two things you have to do. You got to try to win the turnover battle, which is a huge part of it. When a team is more overmatched, you're at a higher level than you, if you want to say that, or you're a massive underdog. You got to win the turnover battle, right? You limit your turnovers and try to generate some big plays, right? Whether it's special teams, defense, offensively, passing game, or long touchdown runs, anything of that. But offensively, that just didn't happen, right? And they had 3 turnovers. So, that's a recipe for disaster. 2 INTs, 1 fumble. Now, defensively, you're going up against an offensive line that is big, physical. They can run the ball, and then you have Sullivan, who's that dual threat guy he's in addition to the run game at 6'4", and has had some really efficient games passing. And so defensively, it was also a struggle. But the turnovers were kind of the death nail for this team, unfortunately, because it's hard enough to stop Somers when you're giving Somers the ball multiple possessions. That's where things can get really bad. When I look at Somers now, again, another dominant performance here. Wanted to see how they were going to respond after that huge victory where they have a little bit of an emotional letdown. No, they were really good in this one. Dominant performance. Starting with Sullivan, their quarterback, 9 of 10 for 98 yards and 2 touchdowns. Dean Palazzolo, again, he's also could be wide receiver of the year. 71 yards receiving and 2 touchdowns. Mason Kelly only had 6 carries and 3 of them for touchdowns, right? He rushed for 72 yards. This is just another day at the office, right, for the Somers team. Did a really good job of kind of closing the door very quickly in this one. Defensively, I mentioned like I did, 3 turnovers they forced. This defensive line dominated up front. They got a lot of pressure, forcing some errant throws. That's where the secondary started to feast a little bit on this Pelham offense, but strong performance by Somers. Let's go to the final game in A, and that is Fox Lane at Eastchester, and Eastchester winning 27-7. And let's start with Fox Lane. I remember before the seasons, I made the prediction that Fox Lane would make it into the playoffs. They had to win their last 2 games to get in, which they did. So to me, I'm glad they lived up to one of my predictions, and they had a good year. After the last couple of seasons have been a little bit tough. Now, speaking about this game and specifically, offensively, that unit has been mixed this year, right? I've talked about it in previous recaps where they have struggled to not turn the ball over, and at times when they can't really run the ball and they have to throw more than they want, it's been a mixed bag, right? And so that happened again because they had to go up against a very tough defensive unit in Eastchester on the road. First three possessions were 3 and outs, right? So, it started off very slow offensively. It put them a lot of pressure on their defense. They also had 2 turnovers on offense. Now, the quarterback in Cernick had a touchdown pass to Fabry, but outside of that, they just couldn't get things really going, and it started off with that slow start and the turnovers. Defensively, this has been a strong unit overall for this entire team, but the big plays were killer for this defense, right? I thought they played relatively well, but 2 40-plus yard touchdowns, right? And those were kind of the really backbreakers for this defense to try to keep things as close as possible. That's when kind of the floodgates opened and couldn't come back. But overall, defensively, this was a strong unit. And it really kept them in a lot of games and even won games for them to get them into the playoffs. Now going to Eastchester, and this is their first playoff win, I think, since, 2015? Just a really good moment for Eastchester, especially at home. First 7-win season since 2015 as well, and you had both the passing game and running game contributing on the offensive side. Bruner had a rushing touchdown. Martucci had a touchdown. Quarterback Schultz, who has been really good this year, he had 2 passing touchdowns, once to Provenzali and once to McCloskey. But again, the story is this defense, and they have been sensational. And McCloskey had an INT. It was another dominant performance. Vinci Affone had an INT. Alex Tito was very active again at the linebacker spot with 8 tackles, and they have playmakers again at each level who can really get after you. On the defensive line, you have Mannion. This is a strong unit, and the reason why I really like this Eastchester group is because of some of the skill guys they have on that offensive side and Schultz and stuff like that. But defensively, I like their ability to swarm to the football, and they do a good job of it. So huge victory for Eastchester. All right, we're humming along now to the B side, and let's talk about Putnam Valley at Pleasantville. And Pleasantville winning 38-6. Pleasantville goes to 8-0. Putnam Valley drops to 5-3. And I'll start with Putnam Valley. Again, they have 5 wins this year, which is the most wins they've had in the season since 2015, where they had 6. So this was a really nice bounce back season for Putnam Valley. Speaking about this game overall, I mean, they were down 38-0 at half, right? So this was a dominant performance by Pleasantville. And when you look at offensively, when they had trouble running the ball with Meister, and they had to pass the ball more than they wanted to, that's where things tend to be a struggle for this offense. And, that continued in this game. Defensively, this has been a very strong unit all year long. It's kind of the staple of Putnam Valley as a team, especially against the run. Now, they only allowed 104 rush yards, right? But they gave up 147 pass yards and some key pass touchdowns and a special teams touchdown, right? So these are things that when again, you're on the road trying to pull off the upset, you got to play some strong defense and you got to win the turnover battle. They limited the run game pretty solidly, but some big pass plays given up and special teams plays was killer. Really liked the way Deshage, Glenn, Tarrant, Dobro on the defensive side played. Pleasantville is just playing at a different level right now, and that's kind of where I'll go to now. I really like the way they had a complete game in this one, and the last few weeks they have been sensational. Now, offensively, they made some big plays. It wasn't a huge explosive offensive performance, only at 251 total yards, 104 of that on the ground. But this offense scored 4 touchdowns, right? They had 4 touchdowns on offense, special teams touchdown. Defense forced some turnovers and were pretty dominant against the run. So every unit making plays for this team. And obviously, we're going to start with Daniel Picard. And he had 4 touchdowns in this game. One of them rushing 32 yards, 78 yards receiving, and 2 touchdowns, and the punt return touchdown. I mean, he is also, again, the front runner to Player of the Year. He has been absolutely sensational. Going to go down as one of the best backs in Section 1 history. Just a sensational performance by him. And this is one of those, again, moments where he just dominates. He dominates a game for you. And Aiden Picard, very efficient, 7 of 11, 147 yards, not turning the ball over. That's a huge thing. Sadao had a rushing touchdown. And on the defensive side, another really strong performance. Horrigan, we know about Horrigan, who also had a sack, and Hudzinski kind of leading the charge defensively. Sadao also making some big plays for them. But a guy like Dylan Jennings, and now a couple weeks in a row, very active on the defensive side, 9 tackles in this game. They did a really good job of limiting the rush attack from Meister, forcing Putt Valley to do things they don't normally like to do, which is throw the ball more. All right, let's go to the next game. One of the upsets, which I was incorrect on, was Lakeland at Pearl River, and Lakeland winning 34-21. And let me start with Lakeland. Kudos to them for proving me wrong, but getting their first playoff win since 2009. And this is also their first 6-win season since 2004-2005. So a really big moment for this Lakeland program. And offensively, quarterback Grady Leonard, 17 of 29, 185 yards, 3 touchdowns. Also had 27 yards rushing and a touchdown. This is against the number 1 defense in points allowed. And although I don't think the offense was unbelievable, they protected the football and made some big plays in key moments. And one, Polo Castro, less than 3 yards a carry at 61 yards rushing on 22 carries. But Kyle Gallagher was sensational in this game. I mean, he was unguardable, 9 catches, 127 yards and a touchdown. Also had an INT on defense. Perry's another one we see make big plays. He had a receiving touchdown in this one. Berlingo had the other receiving touchdown. But this offense made some key plays and key moments and didn't turn the ball over. And that's a huge factor in this game. When you look at the defensive side of the ball, though, Pearl River was also scoring at a high clip these last few weeks. And this defense forcing 4 turnovers, having 4 sacks. And that was the turning point. It was the defense making big plays, getting extra possessions for this offense, changing the game. They even had a defensive touchdown. Nick Oliva leading that way with 2 picks, and one of them being a pick 6. Fabrosi had an INT. I mentioned Gallagher had the other INT. Nick Ferrante getting after the quarterback with 3 sacks. Bubba Baumeister, another great name, 7 tackles and 1 sack for him. It's this defense, which we know Lakeland's offense has been very potent when they get off to fast starts and not turning the ball over. And they did what they need to do. Protect the football. You know, when they protect the football, this offense can make some explosive plays, but it's this defense forcing turnovers, getting sacks. Those were game-changing plays. Now we go to Pearl River. And obviously a disappointing game for them, but it's their first 6-win season since 2019, and they started off very slowly. Sometimes Lakeland had slow starts, but it was Pearl River in this game that started off very slowly. They were down 20-0. And on the offensive side, it was the turnovers that were killer. I mentioned they had 4 in this game, but they clawed their way back and ended up being 21-34 with their latest touchdown by Espinal with 7 minutes left in the fourth. But again, it just too much energy to get back in this game after being down 20-0. They had to get off to a better start, unfortunately, and the turnovers were absolutely killer. Defensively, they were number 1 in points allowed in B. They did have they didn't give up a lot of rush yards in this game. And even in the pass game, 185 is not absolutely killer, but they had a really tough time guarding Gallagher. I mean, they only allowed 97 total yards rushing. So it's not like they gave up a boatload of rush yards, but the turnovers really put them in a bind. Had a tough time guarding Gallagher. 185 pass yards. So, again, unfortunate for Pearl River. I know it didn't end well, but they had a very strong season as well. Let's go to the next game, and that's Nanuet at Ardsley, and Ardsley dominating in this one, 40-7. They go to 7-1. Nanuet drops to 4-4. And we look at Nanuet. They started off really good with that special teams block punt for a touchdown in that first quarter, but then it was all Ardsley the rest of the way. And unfortunately for Nanuet, they just could not get things going offensively, and defensively, it kind of felt like that they wore down. And when I look at Ardsley, Randy had 4 touchdowns, 2 rushing, 2 passing. Another very sensational game from him. And Trey and Colfiore combining for 3 touchdowns, right? 2 of them receiving, 1 of them rushing. Again, the offense getting multiple guys involved, Randy being that orchestrator. And this offensive line doing a good job against this scrappy defensive unit of Nanuet. But this defense had a dominant performance. I mean, the defensive front 7, guys like Speckman, who moved into the end, absolutely taking away the Nanuet rush attack. And Nanuet's, again, that team where if they can't run the ball consistently, the offense tends to struggle. And so Ardsley did a good job of forcing Nanuet to do things they're not comfortable doing, and especially when you get up early, forcing Nanuet to try to throw the ball more, and they just couldn't do it. So dominant performance by by Ardsley over Nanuet. And finally, the last game in B is Nyack at Rye, and Rye winning 33-18. Rye goes to 7-2. Nyack drops to 3-5. And listen, Nyack got 10 first downs. They had 45 plays in this game, but again, not being able to finish drives, getting down early quickly. They only had 1 turnover. So this offense did have some nice moments here, but defensively they gave up over 400 yards. Way too many big plays in the passing game, which was killer to them. The defense also allowed 132 yards on the ground, so over 280 passing, 132 on the ground, 4.7 yards a carry, right? So defensively, they got pushed around. That's kind of where, if we're being honest here. And when I'm looking at Rye, they've now won, I think it was 5 straight. This offense Talking over 400 yards total, like I just said, but it starts with A.J. Miller, who was sensational. He was great. 15 of 17, 278 yards, 3 touchdowns, 0 INTs. Super efficient, commanding, made some big time throws as well. Kessler really leading the way, 167 yards and 2 of those touchdowns. Ciavatti had the other receiving touchdown, but dominant performance passing. They also ran the ball. Luliano had 2 rushing touchdowns, but Charlie Garnett leading the way with 76 yards rushing on the ground. So, Rye has multiple guys who can run the ball. Luliano's kind of been the bell cow back, but they have multiple guys that they can go in there and run some of the ball. And it starts with that offensive line kind of being a dominant force, which they were. Defensively, I don't think it was their best performance defensively, but it was good to see Charlie Swarak back. He had a sack in this game. He's been injured all season long. Trevor Reno had a sack. And this is a Rye defense that is very aggressive, and they rely on multiple guys to make big plays for them. Andrew Wilmore, he's had a very strong year. He had an INT, but Keon Turlau leading the way in tackles with 5. Wellburn, Gonzalez also saw them make some big plays in this game. So, Rye's getting healthier. They're not healthy, I wouldn't say that, right? But getting some more guys back in an important playoff moment is key. They get the win. All right, guys, the final stretch here. Let's talk about the Hudson Valley Football League playoffs. Then we'll do the C and D games, and then we'll close it out. And one of the big upsets here, which is, again, one of the teams of the week right here, which is Peekskill. Peekskill at Spring Valley, and Peekskill winning the game 8-0. And this was a revenge game for Peekskill. And let's start with that. They get of revenge. This was a rematch on the road against a very tough defensive team. And they were able to pull it off. So huge kudos to Peekskill in this one. The last time they had 5 wins in a season was 2015-2016. So really good moment for the program and for the coaching staff. Now offensively, it was a struggle for the most part, but they made just enough plays against a very tough, aggressive Spring Valley defense to win this one. But this defense for Peekskill has been an extremely consistent group. And they really stepped up in this one. They limited Spring Valley in big plays. They had 5 of the 8 games, this year, they allowed 6 points or less, including 2 shutouts, which is one of them was this game. So a really strong performance from this Peekskill defense as a whole. They did a very good job of not allowing Spring Valley out on the edge and making big plays and coming up with some huge stops. And for Spring Valley, I'll just say this for the overall season. They graduated a lot of kids last year. Many didn't think they would get to this moment. But they did, and it's kudos to this coaching staff. Now, offensively, they struggled. They struggled to finish drives, struggled really to get going for most of the game. Defensively, this has been also a very, very strong unit. They also 6 games with 8 or less points allowed, and they only allowed 8 points in this one. So, this is a strong defensive unit, but not enough offense, and at times the offense has been very inconsistent for Spring Valley. And the other Hudson Valley Football League playoff game, Port Chester at Tappan Zee. And Tappan Zee winning 28-6. Tappan Zee goes to 7-1. Port Chester drops to 3-5. And when you look at Port Chester, these last 2 years they've gotten way more victories, which I think has been great for this program, especially going into the independent league. From 2020 to 2022, which is 2 seasons, they were 2-12. Right, but the last 2 years, 7-9. So that's a big difference in wins there. And wins are an important thing, showing, hey, this is what hard work gets you. And so kudos to Port Chester. I know offensively, is not the way they wanted to end the season. They had 2 fumbles in their own 20-yard line, one of them leading to a defensive touchdown. So those were absolute killer in this game. Now, this defense allowed some big pass plays as well. But to me, it was those turnovers that really kind of put the nail in the coffin for the season for Port Chester. When Tappan Zee also had a big moment, getting their 7th win here. They haven't had a 7-win season since 2013-2014. And offensively, Kevalen, a couple passing touchdowns in this one. Michael Martinez made some big plays. We had a great receiving touchdown by Piccioni. Pretty much had to out-jump a dude. It was a nice play in the end zone. Jason Riley also has been an important player for this team. He also had a receiving touchdown. On the defensive side of the ball, you're seeing this defense starting to play really at a high level these last few weeks down the stretch. Owen O'Hara had a fumble recovery for a touchdown. They forced multiple turnovers, especially on Port Chester's side of the field. and that was a huge difference in this one. Happens he gets the victory to get there 7-1. All right, let's do the last 3 games, and that was with the C and D schools. And let's talk about a big one, which was Westlake at Bronxville. Westlake winning 21-8. Westlake goes to 7-0. Bronxville drops to 3-4. And I want to talk about Westlake. These weren't playoffs. This was the final regular season game. They got off to a fast start. They were up 21-0 at half. Dominant performance. Things kind of slowed down in the second half, but held off Bronxville. Started with Callie getting that rushing touchdown. He's been sensational this year. But Bacan had 2 passing touchdowns to Nick Castellano, which was huge. And he was great, Castellano. He had a couple receiving touchdowns, made some big plays on defense, had an INT. And this defense, they forced 3 turnovers. And that was the key thing in Bronxville. They gave up a long rushing touchdown in the second half. But overall, they were really strong. They had Castellano had an INT. Langeza had an INT. And this is a defense that has multiple guys who've been making plays and playing at a high level as well down the stretch. Nelson, Savino, Prosperino, DiNapoli, Castellano. Multiple guys. The list kind of goes on. They kind of a defense with multiple guys who make plays for them at each level of that defense. And when I look at Bronxville, had that long rushing touchdown in the second half. Defensively, I thought they played relatively well, but offensively, the turnovers were absolute killers in this one, right? Getting down 21-0 very early on is a tough hole to get out of. And we've seen that from Bronxville. They got out, at times have gotten off to some slow starts, even though the last couple of weeks they've been playing at a high level. All right, next game, we got Woodlands at Haldane. Haldane winning 37-20. Haldane goes to 6-2. Woodlands drops to 0-7. Woodlands offensively had 201 yards, not a lot of explosive, huge plays. Had a couple passing touchdowns. But defensively gave up a bunch of yards, and that's kind of where I'm going to drive to with Haldane. Offensively, 359 yards of offense and 304 yards rushing 304 yards rushing overall. They had 4 players with 50-plus yards rushing, 50 yards rushing at least in this game. Gianchinta, he had 2 touchdowns, 74 yards. Williams had over 100 yards, 105 and a touchdown. Ryan Van Tassel, we know about him running the football. Gogler had 57 yards rushing and a touchdown. So they were running the ball, controlling the clock here. And defensively, they did get a safety. They did give up some big pass touchdowns. I don't think this was Haldane's best defensive performance, but they were really able to dominate in the trenches and run the ball very effectively. Finally, to wrap it all off, we have Dobbs Ferry at Tuckahoe, and Dobbs Ferry winning 32-27. Dobbs Ferry goes to 5-2. Tuckahoe drops to 4-3. Pretty good amount of offense in this one. And when I look at Dobbs Ferry, Patrick McGoey leading the way with 94 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. They really ran the ball very well. They kind of dominated in the trenches, which is, again, given Tuckahoe's history in the trenches, it was a good feat for Dobbs Ferry on that offensive line because Hardnett had 69 yards rushing. He also had 80 yards passing. Drexel Lewis had a touchdown. Holman had a touchdown. Multiple guys making plays for this offense. And this Dobbs Ferry offensive line moving people was a key one. Now, defensively, it was tough to stop the pass attack. We know about Tuckahoe. They're very good at passing the football. But this defense made just enough plays. Marty O'Leary, Dylan Ravage, Jack Staub, Shamaski. We've heard him multiple times. These are key figures in this that were very active in this game. And it's tough to defend these wide receivers and this pass attack. Tuckahoe is probably one of the best offenses out of the small schools. But they make just enough plays, and they ran the ball very well. And when I look at Tuckahoe, Colachico, he's had a very, very good year. Another strong game in this one, 20 of 37, 253 yards and 2 touchdowns. Also had a rushing touchdown. He's so pivotal for this offense. This offensive line does a pretty good job as well. That's why they're able to throw the ball as much as they can. Now, they're not huge running the ball, but their pass attack is extremely potent. And we've seen with Banky and Snyder, both of them combining for 16 receptions, over 200 yards, and 3 touchdowns, right? So they have one of the best receiving cores and pass attacks out of the small schools. Now, Snyder also had an INT, and Garderi was very active on the defensive side, but they struggled to stop the run. And that was another key factor in this one. This pass attack is very potent, but getting some key stops has been a bit of an issue for Tuckahoe. All right, everyone, that was our show. Thank you guys so much, as always, for tuning in. Um, we have another really big week. We're going to be kind of doing a live show for the playoffs. Again, all focusing in on the playoffs. And then at the end, after the Section 1 game, we're going to be doing some postseason coverage with some awards and stuff. So appreciate you guys. We sent out a message about feedback for our content, our Patreon content. Really appreciate you guys. If you give feedback on it, things you like, things that you think we can add. And can't do everything that people suggest because we're a small group, but we're going to try to implement things that are feasible in our eyes. But appreciate you guys as always, and we'll see you all very soon.